The grand hall of the Varith Dominion stretched out like a canyon carved from blue crystal. Captain Jake Morrison stood at the center, trying not to look as nervous as he felt. Around him, alien warriors towered at least 2 feet taller than any human, their silver skin catching the light from 1,000 floating orbs overhead. Each Varith wore armor that seemed to shift colors, and their eyes glowed with a faint purple light that Jake found both beautiful and unsettling. This was humanity's first official contact with the Varith Dominion, and Jake had been chosen to lead the diplomatic team. He was a good captain, known for staying calm under pressure and finding creative solutions to problems, but standing in front of an alien empress and her entire court was testing even his nerves. Empress sat on a throne that seemed to grow from the floor itself. She was massive even by Varith standards, with silver skin that held streaks of gold. Her presence filled the room like gravity. To her right stood 3 figures who Jake assumed were her daughters. The youngest looked barely interested in the proceedings. The middle one watched with calculating eyes, but the third one, standing closest to the throne, stared at Jake with an expression that could melt steel. That was Princess Kira, and Jake had been briefed about her. Third daughter of the Empress, military commander, undefeated in 7 campaigns, and reportedly the most dangerous member of the royal family. She wore armor that was more practical than decorative, and her hand rested casually on a weapon at her hip that probably could vaporize him before he finished blinking. The translator device in Jake's ear crackled to life as the Empress began to speak. Her voice was deep and resonant, and the translator turned her words into something Jake could understand. Human captain, you come from a small world in a quiet corner of space. Why should the Dominion acknowledge your species? Jake had practiced his response 100 times on the journey here. He stepped forward and bowed the way his cultural advisors had suggested, not too deep, which would show weakness, but enough to show respect. Your Majesty, humanity may be new to this part of space, but we have much to offer. We have medical technology that can heal wounds your doctors struggle with. We have agricultural methods that can feed billions, and we have something else that is perhaps more valuable. We have friends. The Empress tilted her head, and Jake continued, we have peaceful relationships with the Korvath Republic, the Solon Collective, and even the mysterious drift traders, species that have been difficult for the Vera to negotiate with. We could serve as a bridge. There was murmuring among the assembled Vera nobles. Jake caught some of their looks, curiosity mixed with contempt. To them, humans were probably no more impressive than clever pets. Interesting, the Emperor said. And what do you propose? This was it. Jake took a breath and spoke carefully, reading from the prepared statement his diplomatic team had crafted. We propose a partnership agreement, a formal alliance where both our peoples can benefit from shared knowledge and mutual defense. We propose that this partnership be sealed today, witnessed by this court, binding our peoples together going forward. He thought he had said it perfectly, but as soon as the words left his mouth and the translator did its work, the entire hall erupted in chaos. Varith nobles shouted in their own language. Guards stepped forward, hands on weapons, and Princess Kalira, who had been so still and composed, went rigid as if she had been struck by lightning, her glowing eyes fixed on Jake with an intensity that made him want to step back. "What?" she said, and even through the translator, Jake could hear the fury in her voice. "What did you say?" Jake looked at his second officer, Commander Lisa Hayes, who stood behind him with the rest of the human delegation. She looked just as confused as he felt. The translator in his ear was going crazy, picking up dozens of conversations at once. "I said, we propose a partnership," Jake repeated slowly, "an alliance between our peoples." The Empress raised one hand and the hall fell silent. Immediately, she looked at Jake with an expression that might have been amusement. "Captain Morrison, it seems there has been a misunderstanding. In the Verth language, the words you just used do not mean what you think they mean." Jake's stomach dropped. "What do they mean?" "You have just proposed a spousal bond. Specifically, you have proposed marriage to my daughter, Princess Kalira, in front of the entire court, which makes it legally binding under our laws." For a moment, Jake couldn't process the words marriage. He had proposed marriage to an alien princess who looked like she wanted to kill him. Very slowly, that was not Jake started, but the Empress continued. "By Verith tradition, a spousal proposal made before witnesses creates a legal obligation. It can only be dissolved in two ways. First, through ritual combat, where one party defeats the other. Second, through mutual agreement, after a trial bonding period of 60 solar cycles. 60 days, Jake did the math quickly. 60 days. Princess Kira stepped forward and Jake noticed that several guards moved with her as if ready to intervene. She stopped about 10 feet away from him, close enough that he could see the patterns in her silver skin and the way her armor moved like liquid. "I demand ritual combat," she said, her voice cold and sharp. "I will not be bound to this weak creature through a translator's mistake." But the Empress shook her head. "No, Kira, I see opportunity here. The humans have technology and alliances we need. This bond could benefit the Dominion." "Mother, you cannot be serious." "I am always serious. Daughter, you will observe the traditional 60-cycle trial period. The human will remain here as your spouse candidate. At the end of that time, if you both agree to dissolve the bond, it will be done, but you will give this the proper time that tradition demands." Kalira looked like she wanted to argue more, but something in the Empress's expression stopped her. She turned back to Jake, and for a moment their eyes met. Jake saw anger there. Yes, but also something else. Maybe embarrassment, maybe resignation. "Fine," Kira said, 60 cycles, but no. This human, I will make every single day a misery for you. You will beg to dissolve this bond before the time is finished." Jake, despite everything, despite the insanity of the situation and the very real danger he was probably in, felt a smile tug at his lips. It was the same reaction he always had when things went completely wrong. His crew called it his disaster smile. "Well," he said, "I guess we're engaged then. Should I call you princess, or is there more casual term for accidentally proposed spouses?" The look Kira gave him suggested that the next 60 days were going to be very interesting indeed. The quarters they assigned to Jake were beautiful and completely uncomfortable. Everything was built for beings much larger than humans, so the bed felt like a small gymnasium, and the chairs required him to climb. The walls showed moving images of Verith conquests, great battles among the stars that probably were meant to be inspiring but just reminded Jake how outmatched his species was. He had been allowed one meeting with his crew before they returned to the ship in orbit. Commander Lisa Hayes had been blunt about the situation. "Sir, this is insane. We can't leave you here alone with hostile aliens for 2 months. It's not 2 months, it's 60 days. By their calendar, that's actually about 73 Earth days." Jake had tried to smile, but Lisa wasn't having it. Even worse. "Captain, let me stay, or at least let us rotate security teams down here." "No, the Empress was clear. "This is between me and the princess. If we push too hard, we risk the whole diplomatic mission. Humanity needs this alliance, Lisa. The Verath controls 17 systems and have the military strength we lack. If I have to play house with an angry princess for 2 months, that's a small price." Lisa had finally agreed, but Jake could see the worry in her eyes when she left. Now he was alone, sitting on a bed meant for someone twice his size, wondering what he had gotten himself into. The door opened without warning. Princess Kira entered, still wearing her armor, followed by a male Viras, who Jake guessed was some kind of guard or assistant. The princess looked at him with those glowing purple eyes and crossed her arms. "Get up, human, your trial begins now." Jake slid off the bed, which was high enough that the drop jarred his legs a bit. "I don't suppose we could start with breakfast, or whatever meal this is for you. You claim to be a captain, a leader of humans. Let us see if you are anything more than soft flesh and weak words." The training hall was enormous and filled with Verath soldiers going through exercises that looked like they could break a human in half. Kalira led Jake to a cleared area and gestured to a rack of weapons. They all looked deadly and completely unfamiliar. "Choose something," she said. "I'm not sure starting with weapons is a good idea. I don't know how to use any of these." "Then you will lose. Quickly choose." Jake picked something that looked vaguely like a staff, figuring it had the most reach and might let him keep some distance. Kalira took a blade that curved like a question mark and settled into a fighting stance that looked both relaxed and ready to explode into motion. "Defend yourself," she said, and attacked. Jake barely got the staff up in time. The force of her blow rattled his bones and knocked him back 3 steps. She came again, faster than something that size should move, and Jake found himself desperately blocking and backing away. The watching Verath soldiers laughed and made comments in their language that Jake's translator turned into variations of pathetic and weak. 15 seconds and Kira's blades slipped past his guard and stopped an inch from his throat. "Dead," she said simply. Again, they went again. Jake lasted 20 seconds this time, then 18, then 12. Each time Kalira defeated him easily, and each time Jake got back up. After the 10th round, he was breathing hard and his arms felt like rubber, but he settled back into his stance. "Again," he said. Something flickered in Kira's expression. Maybe surprise, maybe annoyance. She defeated him 5 more times, and by the end, Jake could barely hold the staff. He was covered in bruises from where her blade had touched him, marking where he would have died if she had been using real force. "Enough," Kalira finally said. "You are terrible at this." "I know," Jake said, still breathing hard. "You're incredibly skilled. Would you be willing to teach me? I'd like to learn." Kalira stared at him like he had grown a second head. "You want me to teach you Well, I'm going to be here for 60 days. Might as well learn something useful. Besides, you're clearly one of the best fighters I've ever seen. Why wouldn't I want to learn from you? The princess turned and walked away without answering, but Jake thought maybe she looked slightly less angry than before. The days developed a brutal pattern. Kalira would wake him at what felt like 4 in the morning, drag him to training, and spend 2 hours proving how inferior humans were in combat. Then she would take him to meetings with Varath nobles, who looked at him like an interesting insect, then more training than formal dinners where she would serve him Varath food that was its own special torture. Vera cuisine was designed for their biology, which was similar enough to humans that Jake could eat it, but different enough that it made him violently ill. The first time Kalira served him a traditional warrior's meal, Jake ate every bite, despite how wrong it tasted. He spent the next 6 hours in medical bay while human doctors and Varath healers argued over his treatment. The next day Jake showed up to training as usual. Kalira looked at him with something that might have been respect. You should be in medical bay for another day at least, probably, but we have training. I'm not going to learn to fight from a hospital bed. You're a fool. That meal could have killed you. Maybe, but refusing to eat it would have been an insult. You served it to me yourself. I wasn't going to throw it back in your face. Over the following days, Jake noticed small changes. Kalira still pushed him hard in training, but she started actually teaching instead of just beating him. She adjusted the meals to things that wouldn't put him in medical bay, though they still tasted terrible. And sometimes after meetings with nobles, she would explain the politics and the relationships between houses in ways that helped Jake understand the complex web of Varac society. 3 weeks in, they were walking through the palace gardens when Kalira spoke. Without prompting, "Why do you smile so much?" Jake looked at her, surprised by the question. "What do you mean? You smile when you lose a combat. You smile when nobles insult you. You smiled when you proposed to me, though you did not mean to." Why? Jake thought about it. "I guess it's just what I do when things go wrong. Humans have a saying, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. It means when bad things happen, try to find something good in it. And what good do you find in being trapped here with me? I'm learning about your culture. I'm getting better at fighting, and honestly, you're interesting to talk to when you're not actively trying to kill me." Kira stopped walking. "You think I'm interesting? Sure, one of the most skilled warriors in your empire. You're politically savvy enough to navigate your court, and you're not stupid. That's interesting. The fact that you're also terrifying just makes it more interesting." For the first time since Jake had met her, Princess Kira laughed. It was a short sound, quickly cut off, but it was definitely a laugh. She looked at him with an expression Jake couldn't quite read. "You are very strange, Captain Jake Morrison," she said. "I get that a lot," he replied. They walked in silence for a while, and Jake realized that for the first time since arriving, the silence wasn't hostile. It was almost comfortable. He wondered if Kalira noticed it too. The war game tournament was a major event in the Varath calendar. Noble houses sent their best strategic minds to compete in elaborate simulations of space battles and ground campaigns. As Princess Kira's official spouse candidate, Jake was required to attend. More than that, he was expected to participate. "You will embarrass Yourself, Kalira told him the morning of the tournament. Vareth children study warfare from the time they can walk. You will be facing commanders who have won real battles, probably, Jake agreed. But I have to try, right? Besides, humans have been fighting wars for thousands of years. We might not have your technology, but we know something about strategy. The tournament took place in a massive amphitheater where holographic displays showed simulated battlefields. Jake was paired against a Vareth commander named Thuron, who wore medals. That indicated he had led successful campaigns against 3 different species. The scenario was simple: 2 fleets meeting in an asteroid field. Equal numbers, winner determined by destruction of the enemy flagship. Thern deployed his forces in a standard Vareth formation, a wedge designed to punch through enemy lines with overwhelming force. Jake looked at the asteroids drifting through the simulation and made a different choice. He split his fleet into small groups and scattered them throughout the field. Vareth in the audience murmured in confusion. Kalira, sitting in the royal box, leaned forward with interest. Battle began. Thern's wedge drove forward, expecting to meet Jake's fleet head on. Instead, they found empty space. Jake's scattered ships attacked from multiple directions, using the asteroids for cover, striking in, retreating before the forces could respond effectively. It wasn't the honorable clash of fleets that Vareth warfare favored. It was guerrilla warfare in space. Farron adapted quickly, as any good commander would. He tried to reform his forces to create defensive positions, but Jake kept moving, kept hitting from unexpected angles. He sacrificed smaller ships to create openings for strikes against larger vessels. It wasn't pretty or honorable, but it was effective. When Jake's forces finally destroyed Thern's flagship, the amphitheater was silent. Then the Empress began to applaud, and slowly others joined in. Thern himself came over to Jake, looking at the human with new respect. You fight like a coward, he said, but a clever coward. Where did you learn such tactics? Human history, Jake replied. We call it asymmetric warfare. When you're smaller and weaker, you don't fight fair, you fight smart. After the tournament, Kalira cornered Jake in a hallway. That was impressive. Even I did not anticipate those tactics, though. I'm guessing your commanders will adapt quickly now that they've seen it once. They will. But that is the nature of warfare: adaptation and evolution. She paused, seeming to consider something. Would you teach our strategists these tactics? They could be valuable against certain enemies. Sure, if you teach me more about Vareth combat doctrine. In return, they shook on it, and Jake noticed that Kalira's grip, while still strong enough to crush his hand if she wanted, was careful not to hurt him. Cultural exchange became more serious. After that, Jake spent evenings in the palace library learning about Vareth history. He discovered that they weren't just warriors. They had poets, philosophers, musicians. Their art was stark and beautiful, focused on shapes and light rather than the detailed imagery humans favored. Kayla, in turn, asked questions about Earth. She was fascinated by the concept of a death world, a planet so hostile that it had shaped humanity into what they were. Your world had predators that hunted you, she asked one evening. Not just predators, diseases, whether natural disasters. Earth tried to kill humans in about 1,000 different ways. We survived because we were adaptable and stubborn, and you killed the predators. Some of them, others we domesticated. We turned wolves into dogs, useful animals that help us. We took dangerous plants and bred them into crops. We didn't always fight nature. Sometimes we convinced it to work with us instead. Kalira found this concept strange but compelling. The Varath way is to conquer, to dominate. You speak of cooperation even with enemies. Not always. Humans can be brutal when we need to be, but we learned that sometimes making an ally is better than making a corpse. These conversations happened more frequently as the trial period continued. Jake and Kalira fell into an easy rhythm. They would train in the mornings, handle court business during the day, and talk in the evenings. Jake taught Kalira about human music, playing songs from Earth on a portable device. She was particularly fond of classical music, the structured complexity appealing to her tactical mind. Then came the diplomatic banquet with the Corveth Republic. The Corveth were a species the Vera had been unable to establish good relations with. They were traders and negotiators, uncomfortable with the Verath's direct and aggressive approach to diplomacy. The Empress arranged a formal dinner to try once more to open trade negotiations. Jake attended as Kira's spouse candidate, which meant sitting at the high table. The Corveth delegates were smaller than the Vera, with iridescent scales and large expressive eyes. The dinner started poorly. The Varath Empress made generous offers of trade but framed them in ways that sounded like demands. The Corveth kept deflecting, clearly uncomfortable. Jake watched the dynamic and recognized the problem. He leaned over to Kira and whispered, "May I try something?" She looked at him with surprise but nodded slightly. Jake addressed the lead Corveth delegate in careful terms. "Ambassador, I understand your hesitation. The Verth are powerful and direct, and that can be intimidating. But I've learned something during my time here. They value honor and honesty. Above all, when they make an offer, they mean it. There's no hidden trap." The Corveth delegate scales shifted color slightly, a sign of interest. "And you know this? How human?" "Because I accidentally proposed marriage to Princess Kira, and instead of throwing me out an airlock, they held me to the tradition. They respected the law even when it was inconvenient. That's the kind of people you would be trading with." The Corv considered this. Then the delegate asked specific questions about trade goods, tariffs, and protections. Jake helped translate between the Corvs' careful indirect language and the Varath's blunt style. By the end of the evening, preliminary trade agreements were drafted. As the Corv left, the Empress nodded at Jake with approval. Kira waited until they were alone to speak. "That was well done. You understood both sides better than our trained diplomats. Humans are good at being in the middle. We have to be. We're not the strongest, or the smartest, or the fastest at anything, but we're decent at understanding other perspectives." Kira studied him in the dim light of the palace corridor. "I think I am beginning to understand why the Empress allowed this bond to continue. Oh, you make us better, not through strength or technology, but through perspective. The Varath are powerful, but we are set in our ways. You show us different paths." Jake smiled. "That might be the nicest thing you said to me since we met. Do not become accustomed to it. I still think humans are absurdly fragile, but..." She was smiling slightly when she said it, and Jake realized with some surprise that he had started thinking of that small smile as something special. The attack came during a public ceremony in the Capitol Plaza. Jake and Kira were attending the dedication of a new monument to fallen Ferrith warriors. Thousands of citizens filled the plaza, and security should have been airtight. But the assassin had planned carefully. Jake saw the movement in the crowd. First, something moving with purpose against the flow of people. His combat training on Earth had taught him to recognize threats, and years as a ship captain had honed those instincts. He saw the figure raise a weapon, aim directly at Kira, who was speaking with her back turned to the crowd. There was no time to shout a warning. The weapon would fire faster than sound could carry. Jake did the only thing he could. He threw himself forward, putting his body between Kira and the attacker. The blast hit him in the chest and shoulder. It felt like being struck by lightning and fire at the same time. Jake's nerves screamed as the energy weapon tore through human flesh that wasn't evolved to handle such damage. He was aware of hitting the ground, of collars spinning around, of guards swarming the area. Then the pain took over, and his vision went dark. He woke in medical bay 3 days later. The room was full of equipment, both human and Verath technology working together to keep him alive. Commander Lisa Hayes sat in a chair beside his bed, and she nearly knocked over a medical scanner when she saw him open his eyes. "Captain, don't move," doctor said. "You need to stay still." Jake tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. Lisa held water to his lips, and after a moment he managed to croak out a question. "Kalira, the princess is fine. You saved her life, sir. The assassin was captured. Turns out it was a noble from a rival house trying to destabilize the royal family." "Good." Jake closed his eyes, exhausted from just those few words. "Sir, what you did was incredibly brave and incredibly stupid. You're human. That blast should have killed you instantly." "Did it?" "No, but only because Verith medical technology is apparently very good at repairing damage, and because you're apparently too stubborn to die properly." Lisa's voice was thick with emotion. "You scared all of us, Captain." "Sorry." "How long was I out?" 3 days. "The princess has been here the entire time." Jake opened his eyes again, surprised. "What? She hasn't left?" "She insisted on staying even when her mother ordered her to return to court. She's in the hallway now. The doctors made her leave while they ran tests." As if summoned by the words, the door opened and Kali entered. She looked different from the confident warrior Jake had come to know. She looked tired, and her glowing eyes seemed dimmer than usual. When she saw Jake was awake, she stopped in the doorway. "You are the greatest fool in the galaxy," she said quietly. "Probably." Jake agreed. "But you're alive, so I think it worked out." Kaler crossed to the bed in 3 long strides. "You had no chance of surviving that blast. You are human, fragile, weak compared to my species. Why would you do something so foolish?" Jake tried to sit up, but pain lanced through his chest. Lisa helped him adjust the bed so he could at least be somewhat upright. He looked at Kalira and gave her his disaster smile. "You're my spouse, aren't you? Even if it's just pretend, even if it was an accident, the bond means something. I couldn't just let you die." Call stared at him, and Jake saw something break in her expression. "It is not pretend to me anymore." The room went very quiet. Lisa looked between them and quietly excused herself. Jake waited until they were Alone, Kali, you don't have to say things like that because I got hurt. The 60 days are almost up. We can dissolve the bond like we planned. You can go back to your life. Is that what you want? I want you to be happy. I want you to be free to make your own choices. I'm not going to trap you in a bond you never wanted. You are doing it again, Kalira said, and her voice was sharp with frustration. You are being self-sacrificing. You are willing to walk away to make things easier for me. You are not asking what I want. You are deciding for me. I'm trying to be respectful. You are being a coward. Kira's voice rose and some of the medical equipment beeped in alarm. She took a breath and continued more quietly. These past 60 days I have learned about you, about your species, about your world. You told me that humans survived because they were adaptable, because they could cooperate, because they were stubborn. You showed me all of those things. She moved closer to the bed and Jake could see the intensity in her glowing eyes. But you also showed me something else. You showed me honor, not the Vereth idea of honor, which is about strength and conquest. Your honor is about keeping your word even when it costs you, about protecting others even when it is foolish, about treating an accidental bond as if it were real, because that is the right thing to do. Kira, I have had many suitors, Jake Morrison, noble Verath warriors who wanted to marry me for political advantage or because they thought I was a prize to be won. I rejected all of them because none of them saw me. They saw a princess, a military commander, a useful alliance. You argue with me when I am wrong. You praise me when I do well. You treat me as an equal, even though by every measure I am stronger and more dangerous than you. Jake didn't know what to say. Kalira reached out and carefully took his hand, mindful of the medical equipment attached to him. The trial period ends in 10 days. By law, we can dissolve the bond at that time if we both agree, but I do not agree. I choose to honor this bond not because tradition demands it, but because I want to. Your mother will have opinions about this. The court will talk. I'm just a human captain from a backwater world. You are a human captain who saved my life, who helped forge new alliances for my people, who showed our strategists new ways of thinking, who is brave and clever and somehow survives things that should kill him. Kira's voice softened. And who smiles at me even when I am being difficult. You are pretty difficult sometimes. Then we are matched. You are stubborn and foolish. So we're both disasters. That seems like a good foundation for a marriage. You dare call me your spouse, Kira said. But her tone was different now, almost teasing. Jake squeezed her hand gently. Well, technically, you're the one who has to make it official. I'm just the accidental husband who got shot. You are impossible. But Kali was smiling. Really? Smiling, and Jake thought it was the most beautiful thing he had seen since arriving on this world. Is that a yes? He asked. It is a yes, Jake Morrison. When you are healed, we will make this official before the court. The Empress will approve. She saw this outcome before either of us did. She's a smart woman, your mother. She is, and she will expect you to continue helping the Vereth to bridge the gap between our people and yours. You will have political duties, diplomatic missions, and you will still have to train with me every morning. Sounds perfect, Jake said, and meant it. The official ceremony took place 6 weeks after the assassination attempt. Once Jake had recovered enough to stand without Assistants. The grand hall was filled with Vera nobles, human diplomats, and representatives from a dozen species who wanted to witness this unprecedented union. Princess Kira stood in formal armor that gleamed like starlight, and Jake wore a modified Verath ceremonial outfit that the tailor had adapted for human proportions. Empressa presided over the ceremony. Herself, she spoke in the Verath language, her voice carrying through the hall without amplification. Today we witness a bond that began in error and grew into something true. Princess Kira, third daughter of my house, military commander and pride of the Verath, chooses to honor her bond with Captain Jake Morrison of humanity. This union represents more than two individuals. It represents the alliance between our peoples. The ceremony was long and involved complex rituals that Jake had spent days memorizing. There were odds spoken in both languages, symbols exchanged, and traditional challenges, where Kira's family tested whether Jake was worthy. Her two older sisters questioned him about strategy, politics, and his commitment to the Vera people. Jake answered honestly, knowing that any attempt to exaggerate or lie would be seen through immediately. Finally, the Empress asked the final question. Captain Morrison, do you understand that by accepting this bond, you become part of the Verath Dominion? You will be expected to serve our people as you serve your own. I understand, Your Majesty, and I accept, but I would add something with respect. This bond also means that Princess Kira becomes connected to humanity. It goes both ways. We serve each other's people. There was a moment of tense silence. Then the Empress smiled, a rare expression that made several nobles gasp. Well said, Captain. Let it be recorded that this is a bond of equals. As unusual as that may be, after the ceremony, there was a feast that lasted into the night. Jake sat beside Kalira at the high table, accepting congratulations from nobles who had looked at him with contempt 2 months ago. Commander Lisa Hayes approached with several other human officers, all of them grinning. Congratulations, sir. Though I have to say, when we left Earth, nobody expected you to come back married to an alien princess. Life is full of surprises, Commander. Jake looked at Kira. Good surprises. Sometimes. The celebration was interrupted by urgent news. A Verath scout ship had detected movement in a nearby system. The crash swarm, a hostile species that had been quiet for years, was mobilizing a fleet. Initial reports suggested they were targeting both Verath and human colonies along the border. The feast ended quickly as military commanders gathered for an emergency council. Jake and Kalira found themselves in a strategy room with human and Vera officers along with representatives from allied species. The mood was tense. Crash move in overwhelming numbers. Verath General explained, they sacrifice countless smaller ships to bring their larger vessels into position. Traditional Vera tactics have struggled against them in the past. Jake studied the tactical displays showing crush fleet movements. He recognized the pattern. Swarm tactics similar to certain Earth insects. Crash didn't care about individual casualties as long as the collective achieved its goal. What if we don't fight them traditionally? Jake asked. The Crash expect you to meet them head-on, fleet o' fleet. What if we don't give them that fight? Kali leaned forward, understanding in her eyes. Asymmetric warfare, like your tournament strategy. Exactly, we can't match their numbers. But we can be smarter, hit their supply lines, force them to split their fleet. Make them fight the way we want, not the way they want. For the next several hours, Jake and Kira worked together. With both human and Verath strategists, they combined Verath firepower and discipline with human unconventional tactics. The plan that emerged was risky, but elegant. Small strike forces would harass the crash fleet, drawing them into ambush points where larger Verath ships waited. Human vessels, faster and more maneuverable, would serve as bait and scouts. The Empress approved the plan and appointed Jake and Kira as joint commanders of the task force. It was another unprecedented decision, but after the success of their bonding ceremony, few nobles dared to object openly. The campaign against the crash lasted 3 months. Jake commanded from the human vessel Harrison, while Kalira led the Vera forces from her flagship, the Vengeance. They stayed in constant communication, coordinating attacks and adapting to crush responses. The enemy was predictable in their swarm tactics, but dangerous in their sheer numbers. The decisive battle took place near a binary star system. The crash had committed their main fleet, confident they could overwhelm the smaller allied force. Jake's ships baited them into position. Then Kira's forces struck from multiple vectors, using the gravitational pull of the binary stars to slingshot into attack positions. Crash fleet, expecting a standard engagement, found themselves outmaneuvered and divided. When the battle ended, the Crash fleet retreated, broken and unable to continue their offensive. The combined human and Vera forces had won a decisive victory. Jake and Kira met aboard the Harrison for the first time in weeks. When Kalira came aboard, the human crew stood at attention, showing the same respect they would give their own captain. Jake met her in the hangar bay, and despite the formal setting, Kali embraced him in the Verath fashion, a gesture of respect and affection. We did it, Jake said. Both species fighting together. We did, and it will not be the last time. This is only the beginning, Jake. She was right. Over the following months, the alliance between humanity and the Vera Dominion deepened. Mixed crews became common on both human and Vera vessels. Joint training programs were established. Cultural exchanges flourished as both species learned from each other. Jake and Kira became the face of this new alliance. They traveled between human and Var worlds, speaking to civilians and military personnel alike. They demonstrated that cooperation between species was not just possible but beneficial. Humans brought their adaptability and diplomatic skill. Verath brought their strength and technological advancement. One evening, Jake stood on the bridge of the Harrison, looking out at the stars. The ship now had a mixed crew with Verath officers serving alongside humans. Commander Lisa Hayes approached, following his gaze. Strange how things work out, isn't it? Sir, very strange. A few months ago, I made a translation error that accidentally proposed marriage. Now we have a genuine Elias that's changing both our species. The princess is on approach, by the way. She'll be docking in 15 minutes. Kalira had been visiting a human colony, teaching their security forces Verath combat techniques. She would have stories to tell, complaints about human stubbornness, and probably suggestions for how to improve the training programs. He looked forward to all of it. When she arrived on the bridge, Kalira moved with easy confidence. Through the mixed crew, she stopped. Beside Jake, looking out at the same view of stars, I have been thinking about something, she said quietly. What's that? When we met, I told you I would make every day a misery until you begged to dissolve the bond. I remember. You were pretty convincing about it. Too, he said. I failed completely. You never begged, you never gave up. You just kept smiling and moving forward. She looked at him with those glowing purple eyes. I am glad you are stubborn. Jake Morrison, I'm glad you gave me a chance. Princess Kira, he took her hand. A gesture that had become natural over the month. So what's next for us? The Corvette Republic has requested our assistance with a trade dispute. The Solon Collective wants to discuss mutual defense agreements, and my mother wants us to visit the outer colonies to inspect the new mixed military bases. Sounds like a busy schedule. It is, but we will face it together. That is what spouses do, is it not? That's exactly what they do. As the Harrison prepared to jump to its next destination, Jake reflected on the strange path that had brought him here. A translation error had created an impossible situation, but from that accident had grown something real, something important. The alliance between humanity and the Vera was still young, still fragile in some ways, but it was growing stronger every day, and at the center of it all was a bond between a human captain and an alien princess, proving that sometimes the most unlikely partnerships became the strongest ones. The stars awaited full of challenges and opportunities, but Jake and Kira would face them together, showing the galaxy that cooperation was stronger than conquest, that understanding was more powerful than force. The future was unwritten, but it was bright.